Hey everybody! So we are starting to work with some coding tools and start applying those coding tools to visual creative output, right? To design, art, layout, that kind of stuff. So exploring graphic systems basically. So the first tool that we're going to start using is going to be P5js. So P5js is a library for JavaScript, right? It's an open source JavaScript library, as they point out at the very top of their web page, right? So to find out more about this and to see what it's all about, you go to p5js.org, right? So it's part of a larger sort of coding environment for creative purpose, right? Called processing. I will do some videos on processing as well. The advantage of P5 is that it's basically coding for creative people that works in your browser, and it's very easy to access, and it's very easy to sort of like get going with it, right? So some of the really cool features that make this particular library stand out is an absolutely fantastic reference system, right? So if you're trying to figure out how to do one thing or another, if you go to the reference, you will find the answer. An excellent set of tutorials and examples that will allow you to figure out how to do specific things, but more importantly, what kind of approaches can you take? How can you start thinking about visual creativity using code? And so on and so forth, right? So like anybody operating on the intersection between, let's say, programming and design will have will find a lot of use in those tutorials and examples. And then finally, a community. There's a large and growing community of people who use P5 and processing for their work, and it's growing, and they're very supportive. There are seminars, there are all kinds of like meetups and other community events that can be very, very helpful, and there are basically people out there who can answer your questions if you have one. So this is what makes it such an attractive tool for beginners. Okay, so today I'm gonna describe how you can set yourself up and start coding, right? So there are two ways to run your processing environment, and I'll show you both. So the first one is to go to the big button at the bottom of their sidebar on their website that says Start Coding. And then if you click on it, and it opens up a new tab to editor.p5js.org, right? So let's run it. Here it is. So this is the built-in editor. It works in the browser. You can write your code here on the left side, and you can preview and you can run it and view it on the right side. Okay, so here's where you would start changing values. So for example, they start you off with like some of the fundamentals, some of the basic stuff that you're going to need, right? So let's start by creating our canvas, but we'll change, and then instead of making it 400 pixels by 400 pixels, we'll make it 600 pixels by 400 pixels. So switch it from a square to a rectangle, okay, right? And then right here, you'll see a big play button that says play sketch. If you hover over it, it will play the sketch for you. You can run it, and you will see that indeed we see a rectangle that showed up in our preview panel, and that rectangle is gray because here on this line, we're specifically asking for the background to be set to the value of 220, which means that it's a kind of a light gray color. If you're familiar, hopefully you're familiar with the RGB values and how they work. This means that all three values are set to exactly the same number, which will give you a grayscale, right? If your red, green, and blue are all the same value, it will give you one of the shades of gray between black and white. So in this case, it's a light gray because all of them are being set to 220, which is very close to full white, which would be 255, right? So we can verify this by changing it, for example, to 255, and then pressing run again. And now, in fact, we do have a white rectangle here. And if we switch it over and change that value again, it will change again, right? You can stop previewing by pressing the stop button, right? It will stop running the code. You also have an auto refresh option, which means that as you're changing your code, it will also change the value. It can be useful, sure. So if you set to auto refresh, right? So right now it's running in white, and then if I switch this to 0, it will switch to black automatically. It's great if you're just trying to see and like preview some of the options for, let's say, the color, like in our case. But if you're making some mistakes, or if you're not really sure what to expect, it can actually kind of start running really slow. So I tend not to use it, and maybe it's my own control issues, but I always want to run the code myself, right? And so you can always rerun it just by clicking the play button again, and it's just a single click to rerun your code now with a dark gray background. Okay, you can always save your sketches, right? In order to do that, you will have to log in. So here you can see that I'm already logged in, right? This is my username, and it will show you all my sketches and my collections and whatever assets I might have, which is all great. So all you would have to do is just then change it to my first sketch, change the name, and then save it, and it will save it in your collection of sketches, right? So you can change exactly what that editor looks like for you. So you can go ahead and explore those options and enable autosave features and so on and so forth, and look at the output of the sketch in the console. We'll come back to a lot of these features very, very soon, but for now I just want to look at how to set up the environment. So this is option 1, right? We've set up our first environment simply by clicking on this start coding button, and there we are, right? So all of your sketches will be saved online in the cloud, and you'll be able to come back to them, which is great. But if you do want to keep all your sketches on your own computer, or if you're trying to embed them into another project, or you're trying to embed them in another page, for example, just have them embedded into your portfolio, right? So that instead of like showing videos and images of these sketches on your portfolio website, you are actually having them run on a page in your portfolio website. You might want to then set up an external coding environment for P5js. So to do that, you're going to need a couple tools. First one being Visual Studio Code or some other code oriented text editor, right? If you have different preferences, I will absolutely not insist on anything. This is what I use, and I recommend it. It's a nice code editor with lots of very useful features. It's made by Microsoft. There's good support. It's available for both Mac OS and Windows. But if you have other preferences, if you want to use, I don't know, brackets or Atom or whatever else you might prefer, feel free, right? It's non-restrictive, just like any other coding, just write text, right? So I have mine downloaded and installed, so we'll start from there. And then right here, right here I have a template. So P5js is just a library. It's basically just JavaScript, right? So I have a template folder here that allows me to quickly start my environment that would allow me to run JavaScript. So what do you need for an environment to run JavaScript? Well, you need a web page, right? So I have an index.html file that would create a web page, and then a little bit of CSS that I will explain what it does and why do I have that. And then I have a folder where I can store my scripts if I want to break up my sketch into several files. But this template, I find it very useful. You can feel free to use it. I will include the link in the video description, or feel free to create your own. right? So, but what we're going to do now, we are going to start our own little folder on the desktop. So let's do that, new folder, and then we'll call it, let's close this, my first sketch. There we are. And then we are going to open this up in Visual Studio Code. And, oops. So let's open Visual Studio Code. I have it right here. Right, so this is our VS Code environment. And I will open folder, navigate to my desktop, grab my first sketch, open it. So here it is. Right now there's nothing in there, which is perfectly fine. But I'm going to start recreating the template. Feel free to download the entire thing if you want to, right? But I am going to recreate this template from scratch just so that we can talk about how exactly it's built and what exactly is in there, right? So we're going to start with making an index.html file, and we are going to make a folder, call it styles, and we're going to make another folder, call it scripts. So make sure that the scripts and the styles are on the same level. You might encounter something like this, right? So like where the styles is inside the scripts. I don't want that. I want to make sure that they're both on the same level. And then in the index.html, let's copy all the contents, paste this in. So this looks like your typical HTML file, right? With the doc type and the HTML tag and everything, right? So this is where the title would go, and we'll call it my first sketch because this is the name of the sketch, and this is the link to the CSS file that we're going to create. It's going to be inside the styles folder, and it will be called main.css. So let's do that. Main.css is going to be our CSS file. Hopefully nothing groundbreaking here. We are going to add some CSS code in there. So then, as we proceed to the body of the document, you will see that all the scripts will go here. First, the P5js scripts. And there you will see a script with a source pointing to a CDN, which stands for Content Distribution Network. It's the place that distributes content on the web. And in our case, it will allow us to grab the P5js library, in fact, the latest version of P5js library, from that URL and insert this into our own web page, which is fantastic. So you can feel free to use this link. It's great. Or if you want, you can head over to P5js website. And then if you scroll down to P5js and go to the download page in the that's in the footer, right? If you click here, they'll show you several other options to download and use P5js. So one is start coding online. We've already done this. You can download the entire library and host it on your computer, right? They give you a zip file, and that includes the standard P5js library plus the sound add-on and an example project. Could be useful, sure. So here is the link to that zip file. You can download single files, right? You can download it as a full-on JS file or a minified JS file, which is also great. You can use a P5js from CDN, right? So from a content distribution network. So here is the link to the CDN. There, the link here is to a different CDN. And one of the reasons I prefer the link that I'm using is because this link points to a specific version, in this case 1.10.0, which, if you're using some very particular features within P5js, could be very useful because you know that those features are definitely in that version of the library, right? And your code is not going to break. There is a plausible scenario that if I'm adding some specific features that will change in a later version, right, or were somehow part of an earlier version but are no longer a part of the library, then my code will break and it's not going to work. But for my intents and purposes, if like for most of the stuff that I'm doing, that's unlikely to come up. And it's actually much easier for me to just grab the latest P5 version rather than stick to a specific one that they're giving me from their distribution, right? If you want a very specific version of P5js, for those purposes, you can go and look at the older versions. They have a list on GitHub.js. I'm sorry, on github.com that they maintain. You can take a look at all those versions that they used and what the specific version, what the specific features in those versions are. All right, enough about that. So here is the link. It will insert the P5js library into your document, into your HTML document, and then you will insert your own code, which will be located in the script folder and inside the file called sketch.js. So let's go ahead, go into the script folder and create a file, sketch.js in there, and this is where we are going to have our code. So what I did in my template, I created something very similar to what they have in their editor, right? Like a starter template for the sketch, but it's slightly different. So I'm going to explain why it's slightly different. Let's grab the CSS from the main.css file. I'm just going to copy everything and paste this in here. So in the CSS, here's what I'm doing. I'm just setting the height of the HTML document to take 100%, right? So it's going to be 100% of the browser window, right? So full height. And then I'm setting the margins to 0 because by default your browser has 8 pixel margins around every page. I don't need that. And then I'm setting the display property of the entire body of the document to be flex. And the reason why I'm doing this is that it allows me then to take the sketch and then center it both horizontally and vertically in my browser window. I'm going to show you what that looks like, right? And so my sketch will always be centered. So I'll save that. If you see the black, there was a black dot that now disappeared, and I also have this black dot next to my index.html. So I'm gonna save this. So either Command S or Control S if you are on Windows. That's gonna make that dot disappear. Now means that all the changes in that document have been saved. So now let's go and see what I have in my sketch.js. In here, let's open this up, paste this in. So I have the same setup and draw function, and I have the same create canvas call that you noticed in the editor, but I set it up instead of having numerical values for the pixels, so like 400 by 400 pixels or 600 by 400 pixels for the size of the canvas. I'm taking over the entire window of the browser, right? So wherever this document is opened, it's going to take over the entire browser window. So in order for me to facilitate this process, I also have a helper function, right? It resizes my canvas when my browser window is resized, and now sets the size of my canvas to the new dimensions of my browser window, which can be very, very helpful, right? So I'm going to save this, and then just so that we can see how it works, I'm going to add the same background function and then set it up to be 255, but I'm going to do it slightly differently. I'm going to say 0 and 0, and that should give me a red color. If you remember your RGB colors again, this is value for red, so full on, as much red as possible, and no green and no blue, which means that I can expect a red background. So it's JavaScript again. So if you remember, JavaScript doesn't require semicolons. You can put them, you don't have to, doesn't matter. It's going to work. So I'm going to leave this ambiguous style here where I have 2 lines with semicolons and 1 line without, just to highlight that fact that you don't have to use semicolons, but you can if you want to. So I'm going to save this. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my index file and open it in the browser window. So here it is. right? It's in red, as we would expect. This is a full browser window filled with red color. So now if I change the size of my window, right, if I go and set it to be some kind of numerical value, let's say 600 by 400, save that and reload this page. Now the sketch is specifically 600 by 400 pixels, but it's located in the center of the screen because this is how I set up my CSS. So the Windows resize function, though, is still set to apply the full width of my window and full height of my window to my canvas the moment the window is resized. So if I move the size of my browser window, it immediately fills in because that's what that function does. Okay, so that's just an illustration of how the environment can work. So you can either have it as an editor in your browser, or you can have it on your own computer as a folder with an HTML and JavaScript files. There are advantages and drawbacks to both of those. So for example, if you're running it here in the browser window, you will have access to web workers, right? The people behind P5js set up this app to employ web workers, which means that different processes that might take a little bit more time, a little bit more processing power, will actually run a little faster, which is great. But this kind of setup with your own files on your own computer allows you greater flexibility. So in index.html, you can add like an H1 with a title, and you can add a bit of a description, and you can add other things to go on that page, images, the explanation of your design process, and so on and so forth, right? So that could be a really good thing. So pick one, just pick whichever one you prefer, whatever seems easier or more preferable for you. If you don't have any preference and you are completely lost as what to do, just flip a coin. I'm gonna be kind of switching between one and the other every once in a while. Most of the time, most of my examples I will be showing in the web editor. Some of them, when some documentation requirements come up, I might be showing in a different style with local files. But either way, it's your call. Right? So next time I'm going to show you some of the things that you can start doing, how the environment is set up, what is this setup function, what is this draw function, how do they do, how do they work, what do they do, right? And how you can start orienting yourself within this graphical environment. Okay, see you then. Bye. Have fun with it.